Let's say you have a situation where you have variables that are containing Likert type data, and one of the variables, we use attitude 2 as an example, is reversed. For example, with attitude 1, a value of 1 might represent strongly agree. With attitude 2, we've reversed using a negative description, so the value 1 really represents strongly disagree. Now, if you want to analyze your data without having to keep explaining that attitude 2 is a negatively reversed scale, what you can do in SPSS is switch the values for attitude 2. For example, you can make it so that if a person put a 1 in for strongly disagree, that 1 is now a 5. And someone who put a 5 in representing strongly agree, that 5 becomes a 1. And it's really easy to do in SPSS. What we have to do is transform attitude 2 into a new variable. So what we can do is we can recode into different variables using the transform menu. And we'll select the variable that we want to recode, and we will give it a name. I'm going to say attitude 2 recoded so that I remember what it represents. And then we have to specify old and new values. So here's where we switch the direction of that scale. So for example, if a person put in a 1, and this is on a Likert scale from 1 to 5, we would make that 1 become a 5. So we put the 1 under old value, the 5 under new value, and we add. So now we've got that transformation. What we have to do then is transform all of the other variables, or all of the other values. So a 2 becomes a 4, a 3 stays a 3, just so that I don't get confused when I get to the next one. I'll put that in there. So a 3 stays a 3, a 4 becomes a 2, and a 5 becomes a 1. Now you can easily scale this. If, for example, you had a Likert scale from 1 to 7, you could just go through and recode using the same basic scheme. The thing is, you put your old value, whatever is actually stored in the data set, under old value. You put the value that it's going to be mapped to under new value. And once you've done this, you can continue. We've set up how we're going to transform. Oops, sorry, forgot to add the last one, which would have made for problems when I actually ran this command to generate the new variable. So let me add that one. And by the way, let's say you accidentally put one in wrong. You don't have to go through and redo this whole thing. What you can do is click on the item that you entered incorrectly and then simply edit the values. So maybe we make this a 6 just for illustration purposes, and then click change, and that will update that new one to reflect the change. Now we have to change that one back, so this becomes if I remember right, a 4. I'll change that back. The bad thing is when you do that, it resorts these things, and so now they're no longer in that nice, neat order. But we can see 1 becomes 5, 2 becomes 4, 3 stays a 3, 4 becomes a 2, and 5 becomes a 1. And so now we'll go back to our previous screen, and we will run this transformation. And SPSS is going through the process. It generated the new variable, or it should soon. This is a fairly large data set, so it might take a minute to actually go through and do everything. And we can slide over. We can see attitude 2 is a 3, and I'm going to shrink some of these down a little bit so we can see everything on the screen at once. And we can see attitude 2 recoded as a 3. Attitude 2 that was a 5 is recoded as a 1. A 1 is recoded as a 5. And you can see that they've all been reversed. Now, the bad thing is I didn't tell SPSS to format these the same way, so I'm going to go back to my variable view quickly and look at the recoded variable. I'm going to set the width to 1 and the number of decimals to 0. Sorry, I have to do the decimals first, and then I can do the width of the variable. There we go. Now when I go back to my data view, I see the nice integer format. So basically, if we need to transform a variable's values, in other words, make the low value the high value and vice versa, we use the transform menu. We recode into different variables. Don't do it into the same variable, because if you do, you make a mistake, you've lost that data unless you have a backup. We select the variable that we want to recode. Once we've done that, we give the new variable that's going to be generated a name. We can also put a more descriptive label on there if we want to. We set up the old and new values so that SPSS knows what to map a 1 to, a 2 to, a 3, and so on. And we run this. I'm not going to rerun it. We've already done it once. And SPSS will generate a new variable that is a recoding of the original variable. So it's a relatively easy process if you use the transform menu.